Welcome to our deep dive today. It's 2025. And things, well, they aren't looking too rosy for Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook. They're facing quite a gauntlet of challenges this year.
Oh, yeah, they are.
An FTC antitrust trial is looming less than 100 days away.
Wow.
Multiple states are taking action against them over these claims of child harm on their platforms.
Yeah.
And to top it all off, they've got this Supreme Court showdown with investors who are suing over the Cambridge Analytica scandal. We've got a lot to unpack here, so
Okay.
let's dive right in. So let's start with this FTC antitrust trials right around the corner. What's the crux of the FTC's argument?
Well, the FTC is alleging that Meta has a monopoly on what they call personal social networking services.
Okay.
And their argument hinges on this idea that these services are distinct from other social platforms because of the way they leverage personal connections. Those social graphs built around friends and family.
Right.
It's not just about shared interests here.
Yeah.
It's about those close relationships that keep people coming back.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I remember Zuckerberg himself admitting that, Meta focused on those friend and family connections as like a key differentiator. It wasn't just about building a platform for those broader interests.
Exactly. And the FTC is using that admission, along with research from their expert witness, Professor Clifford Lampe, to argue that these friend and family dynamics create a unique market that Meta has essentially cornered.
So they're saying that Meta used acquisitions like Instagram and WhatsApp to eliminate competition in this specific market.
Precisely. The FTC is arguing that those acquisitions weren't just about expanding Meta's reach.
Yeah.
They were strategic moves to squash potential rivals before they could gain a foothold in this personal social networking space.
Wouldn't Meta argue that they face competition from other platforms like TikTok and YouTube? I mean, people have options when it comes to how they spend their time online.
That's their main defense.
Right.
But the FTC is pushing back on that. They're pointing to data that suggests that when it comes to features specifically designed for sharing with friends and family, Meta still holds a dominant market share. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
Okay.
TikTok might be great for entertainment,
Right.
but it doesn't replace that core need for personal connection that Meta has tapped into so effectively.
And then there's that whole network effect thing, right? The more of your friends and family are on a platform, the harder it is to leave even if you wanted to.
Right. It creates a kind of inertia.
Yeah.
You're on Facebook or Instagram because everyone you know is there.
Right.
And they're there because you are. It becomes this self-perpetuating cycle that makes it incredibly difficult for any competitor to break in.
I've definitely felt that pull myself.
Yeah.
Like switching platforms would mean starting from scratch, rebuilding that whole network.
Yeah.
It's daunting.
Exactly. And that's precisely the kind of dominance the FTC is concerned about.
Okay.
They argue that Meta has exploited this network effect to maintain their monopoly, even going so far as to increase ad loads for users who are less likely to leave, those heavily invested in those friend and family connections.
So the FTC is painting a picture of Meta as this powerful giant that strategically eliminated competition and then took advantage of its captive audience. It's a pretty damning accusation.
It is, and the stakes are incredibly high. If the FTC wins, Meta could face restrictions on future acquisitions.
Wow.
Or even be forced to break up the company. Imagine Instagram and WhatsApp as separate entities competing with Facebook and each other. It would be a seismic shift in the social media landscape.
That's a lot to process.
Yeah.
And this is just one of the major challenges they're facing this year.
Right. We haven't even touched on the state's lawsuits over child harm or the Cambridge Analytica case in the Supreme Court. Each of those presents its own set of complexities and potential consequences for Meta.
Let's move on there. I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear more about these lawsuits from the states. What are their main concerns, and how could they impact Meta's future?
Well, the states are taking aim at what they see as the dark side of Meta's engagement tactics, specifically the potential harm to young users. They're arguing that Meta knowingly designed its platforms to be addictive and harmful, particularly to teenagers.
So it's not just about market dominance anymore, but about the ethical implications of their platform design.
Right.
What specific features are the states focusing on?
They're highlighting things like infinite scroll autoplay videos and those constant notifications. They're arguing that these features are intentionally designed to exploit young people's developing brains,
Right.
keeping them hooked and coming back for more, even if it's detrimental to their well-being.
I remember reading about Sean Parker, Facebook's founding president, admitting that they built the platform to be addictive, using tactics that a hacker would use to exploit human psychology. Do Do you think those kinds of statements will be used against them in court?
Absolutely. Those admissions from former executives will be central to the state's case. They'll argue that Meta knew they were creating a potentially harmful environment for young users, but prioritized profits over user safety.
And what about those filters that simulate plastic surgery? Those have been linked to body dysmorphia and eating disorders, especially among teenage girls. Are the states addressing those as well?
Yes. The states are going after those filters aggressively. They're claiming that Meta was repeatedly warned about the dangers of these filters, even by their own internal experts.
Really?
They point to specific instances where Meta's own head of policy warned about the potential for these filters to actively encourage young girls into body dysmorphia.
Wow, that's a pretty damning accusation. Did Meta address those concerns at all?
Well, the states are arguing that not only did Meta ignore these internal warnings, but also actively downplayed the results of their own research about the negative impacts of their platforms on teenagers.
Oh, wow.
They even criticized the researchers' methodologies when the findings weren't favorable. It's almost like they were trying to bury the evidence.
It's starting to feel like a pattern, isn't it? First acquiring potential rivals to eliminate competition, then ignoring internal warnings about harm to users, all to protect their bottom line.
That's the narrative the states are building, and it's a compelling one.
Yeah.
They're going to argue that Meta had the resources and the knowledge to make their platforms safer for children, but chose not to because it might have impacted their profits.
So what are the potential outcomes if the states are successful with these lawsuits?
If the states win, Meta could be forced to make significant changes to their platform design.
Yep.
They might have to remove those addictive features like infinite scroll and autoplay, implement stricter age verification measures, and even face restrictions on how they target ads to young users. It could fundamentally change the way we experience social media.
It sounds like a win for child safety.
Yeah.
But I wonder if those changes could also make these platforms less engaging for users overall. It's a tricky balance, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And that's a debate that's likely to rage on regardless of the outcome of these cases. Is it possible to create a social media environment that's both engaging and safe, especially for young people? That's the million-dollar question.
So we've got this FTC antitrust case focusing on Meta's market dominance and these lawsuits from the states targeting their impact on children. It's already a lot to handle. But then there's that Cambridge Analytica case looming in the Supreme Court. What are the key issues there, and how could that impact Meta's future? This Cambridge Analytica case, it feels like ancient history, but it's coming back to haunt Meta in a big way with this Supreme Court trial.
It is.
What's the gist of this case?
This case brings us back to data privacy, a topic that's been a thorn in Meta's side for years.
Yeah.
If you recall, the Cambridge Analytica scandal involved this political consulting firm harvesting data from millions of Facebook users without their consent.
Right.
And then using that data for targeted political advertising. It was a massive breach of trust. And it raised serious concerns about how Meta handles user data and its potential for misuse.
Right. It was a huge deal at the time. But how does that translate into a lawsuit now, all these years later?
Well, in this case, it's not users suing Meta directly, but investors. They're alleging that Meta misled them about their data privacy practices, which caused financial harm when the scandal broke and their stock value plummeted. Essentially, they're arguing that Meta downplayed the severity of their data privacy problems, which impacted investor confidence and ultimately hurt their bottom line.
So it's less about the ethical implications of data privacy and more about the financial consequences for Meta and its investors.
That's right. This case is about accountability to shareholders. The investors are claiming that Meta had a responsibility to be transparent about their data privacy vulnerabilities, and that their failure to do so had direct financial repercussions.
This case could set a precedent for how tech companies handle user data and their responsibility to be upfront with investors about potential risks, couldn't it?
Absolutely. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of the investors, it could send shockwaves through the tech industry.
Wow.
Companies might be forced to be much more cautious about data collection practices and prioritize transparency to avoid similar legal battles down the line.
So we've got this trifecta of challenges for Meta in 2025. The FTC antitrust trial lawsuits from states over child harm, and now the Supreme Court case focused on data privacy and investor responsibility. It seems like they're fighting battles on all fronts.
It really does feel like a pivotal year for Meta. The outcomes of these cases could reshape not just their company, but the entire tech landscape. Imagine a world where Meta is forced to break up.
Right.
Where social media platforms are redesigned to prioritize user well-being over engagement, and where data privacy becomes a paramount concern for both companies and investors.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around, but it's also kind of exciting, isn't it?
I agree.
It feels like we're on the cusp of a major shift in how we interact with technology and how these powerful tech giants are held accountable.
It's a fascinating time to be observing these developments. And it's not just about Meta. The decisions made in these cases could have ripple effects throughout the entire tech industry, influencing everything from platform design and data privacy practices to the way information is shared and consumed online.
What does all of this mean for us, the everyday users of these platforms? And what about the advertisers and news organizations that rely on them?
If the FTC succeeds in breaking up Meta, we might see a more diverse social media landscape emerge,
Sure.
with smaller companies offering alternative platforms that prioritize different values, like privacy or ethical design. That could be a good thing for users, giving them more choice and control over their online experience.
But wouldn't a breakup also potentially impact innovation? What if a less dominant Meta means fewer resources for developing new features and technologies?
That's a valid concern. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. On the one hand, breaking up a giant like Meta could stifle innovation and slow down progress. On the other hand, it could create opportunities for smaller companies to step in and develop new and innovative solutions that better serve user needs and address societal concerns.
And what about the advertising market?
Yeah.
So much of digital advertising relies on Meta's vast reach and data collection capabilities. How could these legal battles impact the way ads are targeted and delivered?
If Meta faces restrictions on data collection or is forced to break up, it could disrupt the entire advertising ecosystem. Advertisers might have to find new ways to reach their target audiences, potentially relying more on contextual advertising or alternative platforms that offer different data-driven targeting options.
It sounds like it could be a messy transition for advertisers. And what about news organizations? Many rely heavily on platforms like Facebook to reach their audiences. How could potential changes to Meta's platforms impact the way news is shared and consumed?
That's a crucial question. If Meta is forced to change its algorithms or if users shift away from their platforms, it could have significant repercussions for news organizations.
Right.
They might need to rethink their distribution strategies, focusing more on building direct relationships with their audiences or exploring alternative platforms for reaching new readers. It could be a challenging time for the media landscape as well.
So we're standing at a crossroads. The decisions made in these courtrooms could have far-reaching consequences impacting not just Meta, but the entire tech industry, the advertising market, the news media, and even the way we connect and interact with each other online.
It's a time of great uncertainty, but also great potential. As these legal battles unfold, we'll be watching closely to see how they reshape the digital landscape and what kind of future they pave the way for.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Meta's tumultuous 2025. It's clear that this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation about the power and responsibility of tech giants, the future of social media, and the role we all play in shaping the digital world we inhabit. What are your thoughts? What are your hopes and fears for the future of Meta and the wider tech landscape? We'd love to hear your perspectives.